My friends, when it comes to mixing, a lot of the times we're just trying to create a partnership between two instruments at a time, whether that be vocals and guitars, bass and drums, or what this video is about, guitar and bass. When any of the aforementioned partnerships aren't actually working together, it creates a disconnect from the listener who's trying to enjoy the song, and that's no good for us in our profession. And they might not know the mixing terms, but they just know that something's wrong. Have you ever had a mix where the guitars and bass sounded kind of like this? Well, by the end of this video, we'll have an understanding of at least one of these partnerships and be able to tackle the others hopefully in the near future. So what's happening, fam? Miami here with JST, and a while back I did a video that you guys seem to really love. It was about finding the crossover frequency in your bass so that your low end was always working perfectly in your mix. You know, you would take the bass, duplicate the DI signal, and process them in separate ways, one for the high end and one for the low end. Well, I think it only makes sense to follow up to that and make a video about how to get the bass and the guitars to gel together once and for all. And we're gonna go through a few different techniques that will hopefully give you some instant results, because that's what we're here for, right? Trying to find the simplest way from point A to point B. So let's do it. Quick, dirty, and to the point. Number one, using the same cab or impulse response. You have to think when you're using a cabinet or impulse response that it's just an EQ curve, right? By sending both of those instruments to the same EQ curve, you're kind of pre-making them gel without doing any extra work. But let me clarify something first. You want to find the right guitar cab for the guitar first, and then you want to send the bass to the same guitar cabinet. This works especially well when you're doing the split bass technique, because a guitar cab isn't going to have the same kind of extended low end, right, that a bass cab would have. But since you're processing the bass differently, you don't even have to send that to the cab. And you guys have been giving the channel so much love. I'm trying to process my subs here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like button, and notification bell to be notified when we upload new content. Transition game, still crazy. So let's do an example of a guitar and bass being sent to the same guitar cab versus not being sent to the same guitar cab, and see which one sounds better. Can I just say how sick that guitar and bass tone sounded? I was using ToneForge Jeff Loomis for both of those, and if you guys were big fans of how that sounded, make sure to go in the description below to download your free 14-day trial of it today. Okay, but back to the bass and guitar. Did you notice how much more gelled they were together when we were sending them to the same impulse response or cabinet? You're gonna really notice that in the mid-range and upper mid-range, because that's the spot where they usually clash the most. But that's not just helping your bass and your guitar. By sending both of those to the same EQ curve, it's opening up space for the vocals, because now the bass and guitar are occupying a bit more of the same space, leaving some freedom for the voice to shine. But let's say you're not trying to send your stuff to the same cabinet, you know, or they're already processed and it's not even an option. And that brings us to the obvious number two. Using EQ. Now, when you're EQing to make a guitar and bass gel, a few different factors come into play. Did you already do the split bass technique? Or are you trying to have a really round low end? This will change the way that you approach this. Let's listen to that guitar and bass without any EQ whatsoever at the moment. So the first thing we're gonna do here is high pass and low pass both of these instruments. We're gonna do that with the guitar from around 80 to 100 hertz to 10 to 12K, somewhere in that area, cutting everything above and below. Just move them around with the high pass and low pass filters until you feel like you found a sweet spot. And now for the bass, we're gonna cut everything below 20 and everything above 5 to 6K. And now for the biggest part of this, you're going to either split the bass the same way that I did in that video I was talking about, or you're going to make a cut in the 200 to 500 hertz range with a pretty wide curve. I prefer doing the split bass technique, but either of these will work. And for guitar, you're gonna make a decently wide cut in the 500 to 700 hertz range. But make sure that you're listening to the bass while you do this so you're sure that it's sitting right. Now all we gotta do is validate ourselves by listening to a before and after. And that's an effective way to use EQ to make your guitar and bass gel together. On to our next topic, number 3. By just using a limiter on the guitar and bass, you can make them gel together better. It has nothing to do with EQ and everything to do with just forcing them into submission with compression. This is a pretty simple one if you ask me. For the guitars, you're going to want to just kind of shave off the peaks with a limiter, but with a bass, you can be a lot more aggressive. You know, sometimes I'll limit a bass 10 dB of gain reduction or even 20, like it just depends how hard I want to smash that thing. Let's listen to a before and after of doing some limiting on the guitars and bass now. That's the kind of marriage that we're looking for when we're trying to gel two instruments. And it doesn't really take a lot of time to do at all. But on to the last thing that you could do to make a guitar and bass gel. Maybe I should have mentioned this one first, because it might be the most important. Locking the bass to the grid. Now, I know there's always gonna be a war on how much you should edit your guitars and bass, but locking your bass to the grid makes it really easy for the guitars to feel wider. And I'm talking about quantizing almost 100%. It really makes a huge difference because a lot of what we perceive to be guitar and bass not gelling together is just because of how sloppy it was played or the fact that it was unedited. So you want to make sure that you're doing that with the bass, but you don't want to edit the guitars too closely to the grid because you typically track those in stereo, right? And the more closely together those waveforms are, the more issues that you're going to have with your stereo field. It's not going to feel as wide anymore. But since the bass is mono and straight up and down the middle, it doesn't really make a difference. It's kind of the backbone of your track. And on top of that, when you lock the bass to the grid, it makes sure that the kick and snare are hitting at the same time so those transients feel good as you're listening to the song. Let's take a listen to before and after doing a little bit of bass editing. That didn't really take a lot of time either. And every DAW that I know basically gives you the option to quantize or grid or warp. And by doing that, you're simply making the bass and guitars gel together without having to get into any of the real mixing facts, you know? Like this is one of those things you would do in the editing stage. So by the time you get to mixing, it's already a lot easier. You can use one of the other moves that we talked about. There's other ways to get it right at the source, like having a very consistent player for one, or having somebody play the guitar and bass because they're gonna have the same picking and playing style, right? That's gonna also make things work together in an easier way than having different players try to come at it from different angles. But this video was more focused on the things that we can actually control in the mixing stage, so I didn't really want to talk too much about that. So let's go over all of these one more time. Using the same impulse response, EQ, limiting both buses, and locking your bass to the grid. With these 4 tips under your belt, hopefully you'll be, well, 4 steps closer to making sure that your guitar and bass work together in every single song that you have. A lot of times when you're just listening back to a rhythm guitar and a bass guitar, you can't imagine what would make them work together. But with these 4 moves, you'll be way closer to getting your desired result each and every time. Are there other ways you go about getting your guitars to gel? Are there any things that I talked about in this video that you do religiously each and every time? Leave it in the comments below and I will chat with you fine people, like I always do. If you're an engineer on the come up, give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, you only have to do it one time, and tap that bell for notification so when a video drops, you know the location. Until next time, my friends, I'm out of here.